Happy New Year, everyone. I'm Amy Cook, CEO of the John Locke Foundation, for those of you who don't know. Welcome to it's the first episode of Locked and Loaded for 2022. A little different for this first one. I've got with me my co-collaborator. I started to call you co-conspirator, but that has a kind of a nasty connotation.
But it's not wrong.
Right. That's exactly right. So with me is Donald Bryson, who is the president of the John Locke Foundation. And if you all remember, we were here just a little over a year ago explaining how the Civitas Institute and the John Locke Foundation were merging capacities. And Donald, you put it perfectly. You said we were going from think tank to battle tank. What I really loved is you said Locke is going to get a little punchier and Civitas a little bit more academic. Mm-hmm. And so we blended these families. We're here a year later. How did we do?
I think we did really well. I think the John Locke Foundation had a phenomenal year. Of course, we're a public policy organization, right? And so there's the public policy part, and then there's the organization part. On the public policy side, I think North Carolina saw one of its most successful public policy years with the state budget. One finally being signed by Governor Cooper. It just took him 5 years to sign his first budget, but
he's just a little slow to get there.
A little slow, but with that budget, we got tax cuts on the personal income tax rate. We have a phasing out, completely getting rid of the corporate income tax rate in the next 5 years or so.
Can I stop you on that real quick?
Sure.
That is something that both organizations have been working towards and advocating for as long as they've been around.
That's right.
So think about that, everybody. I mean, that is amazing.
Oh, it is.
And I have gotten outreach. I think it was Iowa. Iowa said think tank in Iowa sent me an email and said just wanted to show you this. They actually posted something essentially saying North Carolina and what we have done, what we advocated for, what the state legislature passed, what finally a Democrat governor, Roy Cooper, signed into law is the gold standard.
That's high praise.
Right?
That's great praise.
Coming from another state. South Carolina, so our friends to the south, said that if this were a NASCAR race, if tax reform were a NASCAR race, South Carolina is stuck in traffic, and we are lapping them while they're just sitting there.
It's a bad day in Darlington.
That's right. So, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt,
no, it's fine.
But I just wanted, especially coming from Colorado, a state that has Tabor in its constitution, but the state legislature for decades has been doing everything it can to avoid the Tabor cap and using fees, going around Tabor, suing so that the state Supreme Court could redefine what a tax and a fee is. The fact that tax reform, bringing eliminating the corporate income tax and then reducing the personal income tax rate to 3.99, that's remarkable.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's absolutely remarkable, and it continues on this sort of decade, more than a decade now, of success that we've seen policy-wise. North Carolina, driven largely by the Civitas Institute and the John Locke Foundation, now combined as Locke. And that budget did more remarkable things, not only cutting taxes, controlling spending, also expanding the school choice options we have for families in North Carolina. A variety of things happened in that budget, and other policy things happened throughout what was, I think, the second longest legislative session ever.
I feel sorry for them.
Oh, it was a rough year overall.
And our government affairs team.
And our government affairs team, who powered all the way through that, and they did a good job. There's more to do. Obviously, we didn't get everything done we wanted, but what would we do this year if we got everything done in 2021?
Right. We wouldn't have work to do. But I also mentioned sort of the reform of the powers of the executive branch. So not just tax reform, there was more in that budget. There was a reining in of some power of the executive branch. We have seen the executive branch essentially operate over the last almost 2 years under a state of emergency. We are how many days into we're knocking on the door of over 700 days of being under emergency rule. And the state legislature also put into that budget a reining in of that power, which is something we championed as well.
Well, absolutely, and it's something that we could probably expect Governor Cooper to challenge in the courts over the coming months. But you know what? He signed it into law right now, and we get to argue about it, which is okay as far as that goes. And I think that there needs to be a discussion in North Carolina about what is the power of the executive branch. North Carolina has a very long history of being very skeptical of the executive branch. Remember, we were the last state in the whole country to give the governor veto power. That was in 1996. And now we have a governor who accounts for more than half of all vetoes ever done by any governor all by himself. And so the executive branch has expanded its power rapidly under Roy Cooper, and I think we're approaching something like 40% of his tenure as governor. We're not quite there, but close to 40% of his tenure as governor has been under a state of emergency. And where does he get that authority from? Did people anticipate a pandemic, an ongoing pandemic, when they passed the Emergency Powers Act?
Yeah, so that's something that came up that obviously wasn't on really anybody's public policy radar until the pandemic. And here we are. I tell friends in other states, we're still under a state of emergency, and they're like, no, you can't be. I said, yes, we are. And we've gotten questions from some of our supporters and investors. Why don't we sue the governor over the emergency powers, over the fact that we are still under a state of emergency? And part of that is because chances are we'll lose at the state Supreme Court.
Chances are we'll lose out at the state Supreme Court. We always get the question of why haven't Republicans tried to do anything to, bring in the governor's powers? And the truth is, Republicans in the General Assembly have. They've passed several bills, all of which have been vetoed by the governor. And there's not a supermajority of Republicans. It's quickly turned into a partisan issue, rather than a question of what is good governance. And so, Democrats aren't crossing the aisle in the General Assembly to override those vetoes. I often wonder how those Democrats would vote if Mark Robinson was governor or if Pat McCrory was governor, but they aren't asking themselves those questions.
Right. And the other one would be election integrity, the security of our elections. We did a poll, the Civitas Center for Public Integrity did a poll on polled North Carolinians, likely voters. Do you think the next election will be free and fair? The 2022 election will be free and fair. And what was it, 41%, I think?
41%.
It is a significant percentage of likely North Carolina voters that do not think the 2022 elections will be free and fair. Legislature did try to address that. We, of course, again, championed free and fair elections, the collusive, getting rid of the collusive lawsuit, which was in the budget, but also just free and fair elections. And that's something that Governor Cooper also vetoed.
It is something he vetoed. I know it's something that people will continue to fight for, is to have more integrity in our elections, regardless of even if election fraud is widespread or not. The fact that 40% of the public has a perception that our elections may not be legitimate in nature is a problem in a representative democracy.
Right.
And that means that they don't think that the government's legitimate.
And there's very little faith and trust in institutions.
Right.
And when you start seeing that decay of trust, that's when we see, protests or just sort of angst.
Right.
Let's put it that way. So that was on the public policy side, which we have said we had a very good year going from think tank to battle tank. And part of that was the amount of resources. As we combined our resources, we were able to reinvest, and we had a significant presence down at the state capitol. 3 team members down at the state capitol for the 2021 legislative session, as opposed to each of us having one.
Right.
It made a huge difference, especially in this long session. Let's talk about another thing. When we merged capacities, Carolina Journal.
Oh yeah, Carolina Journal it's a huge part of our organization here, and if you've been looking, if you get the print edition of it, you'll see a complete revamp of that design. I think it looks really sharp, looks great. We're going to get a new website for Carolina Journal. For that matter, we've gotten a whole new website redesigned for the John Locke Foundation website.
Well, and that gets to the infrastructure of the organization itself. Carolina Journal, we've added Dallas Woodhouse, who came from Civitas, who, if you haven't listened to or read about extreme injustice, I highly recommend it. No one else covered what is happening at the state Supreme Court the way we have. Other news outlets in the state have shied away from it, but our reporting led to national coverage, and we now have a serial podcast, which, by the way, we'll be building upon going forward as well. But it's called Extreme Injustice. Go to extremeinjustice.com. And I would also throw in this brand new studio too.
That's right, absolutely. This brand new studio with this nice backdrop. We actually have a lot of capacities in the studio, but we're happy to have this, and it's been very useful, and your videos look very nice every week. I'm happy to be part of it.
Well, and so thank you for that, and you're welcome. We'll invite you back.
Thank you.
I want to ask you, that was 2021. What do we expect from 2022?
Well, as Zach Galifianakis said in the movie The Campaign, it's a mess. It's going to be a mess. I think in North Carolina we can expect a lot of things, ongoing lawsuits regarding redistricting. Here it is January, and we still don't really know what our legislative, that's state house and state senate, or our congressional districts will look like. There's an ongoing lawsuit there. There's also an ongoing lawsuit at the state Supreme Court, NAACP v. Moore, which is what extreme injustice is about, to overturn two legally voted on state constitution amendments regarding the maximum income tax rate and voter ID. How's that going to play out in the courts going forward? On top of that, we're also, I think we can expect an October surprise from Congress, because at this point the Biden administration doesn't have a lot to show for itself. Midterm elections are not good for the power that's in the White House, and Democrats in Congress are going to have to show that they've done something, and I would expect a rush to do something in October.
Well, and I'd say the other thing is to expect this from 2022. As sure as the sun rises, in the east and sets in the west, Mark Elias, political hack, Democrat operative with a law license, who, by the way, has been sanctioned in Texas, and whose I would call co-conspirator on the Hillary Clinton campaign, has been indicted. Mark Elias will continue to torment voters in North Carolina. So I think we can expect that for sure in 22.
I would say he has tormented voters everywhere. People talk about the big lie. The big lie being defined by the left as whether or not Joe Biden was legitimately elected in 2020. But remember, the original big lie was this Russia collusion story, which when it got dug into very far, found out that it all stemmed from the Steele dossier, which, by the way, was financed and ordered by, Mark Elias, who worked for the Hillary Clinton campaign. I would call that the original big lie.
That's and so true, and yet the left in North Carolina continue to embrace Mark Elias. Discredited, sanctioned, everything else. He is not a good actor, and they continue to embrace him, and he is still tormenting voters in the state of North Carolina, and will continue in 2022. It's a short session. Do we expect anything policy-wise big? Because we got a lot in the last session.
We got a lot. I wouldn't expect a lot going on. Typically, the short legislative sessions, when they come in and they make some edits to the budget. Remember, they just passed the budget back in, October?
Right.
So, how much editing is there going to need to be done by May? There might be some. What I would look at for the short legislative session is whether or not the legislators are willing to put some constitutional amendments on the ballot. And that would be, the Tell Amendment, the tax and expenditure limitation, similar to the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights in Colorado. Will they put right to work into the state constitution? Will they repeal the literacy requirements in the state constitution in order to be able to vote? These are all things that have sort of been floating out there, but it's hard to see or hard to know exactly what the legislative leadership's thinking on those.
Okay, so last two questions, and we can wrap it up. One, what should people be looking for? What should they be we touched on a bunch of things. What in particular should they, is it elections, is it the judiciary? What should they be looking for? And the last thing, something unexpected, something that surprised you either last year or you anticipate it will be coming this year. Which in that case, it's not really a surprise, is it?
What should people be looking for? That's always a fun question. What I think people should be looking for in 2022 is what's going on with the state Supreme Court, or actually the court system in North Carolina. Will the court system move forward and try to force the General Assembly to spend billions more in public education? Does the court system actually have the power to do that? The second question is, what else is the Supreme Court going to rule on, and how is that going to look in terms of how it shapes the judicial races as we move towards November? Because remember, in North Carolina, we elect all of the Court of Appeals and we elect the entire state Supreme Court. And I think that we have the potential of actually having an issue-based race or issue-based races on the state Supreme Court this year and actually getting a lot of attention. That being said, that all leads to, right now, the Democrats have a tenuous 4-3 partisan majority on the state Supreme Court. Does that flip in November? The big surprise that came, I think, last year and will continue to feed into this year, there's always a backlash for a first-term president in his first midterm. I don't think I expected this quick and this just vitriolic of a backlash on President Biden at this point. His disapproval, or his disapproval numbers on how he's doing in his job are terrible, not only in North Carolina with the Civitas poll that we run here at the John Locke Foundation, but also national polls through The Economist, YouGov, MSNBC, Washington Post, all of the polling. His numbers are really bad. And remember, this is before any Republican or any sort of pressure group has run any ad.
Right.
It's only going to get worse for the president.
Good point on that. So for me, I'll say two things that surprised me. One is that we are still 2 years into a lockdown and this whole pandemic. I was one of those who really thought that we would get back to normal after the election because I thought it would be used as an election tool. Right. What it has been used as is really a club. It has been so politicized, and it is a club. When I say a club, not like you join a club, but like a club over the head of somebody.
So there are no T-shirts.
Yes. You don't get a membership card, but it has been used as a weapon against the American people. And I guess I didn't anticipate that. So surprised about that. And on a personal level, and I'll just throw this out, I won the fantasy football championship for the Locke Foundation, and call it beginner's luck, but yeah, I won. And so that was probably the biggest surprise because I was so...
We'll never live it down.
No, I'm insufferable when it comes to winning. And then I would agree with you on what to watch. We have three co-equal branches of government, the executive, legislative, and the judicial. And the sexy races, so to speak, are congressional, U.S. Senate, and those are going to be big, state legislature. The ones that could have the single most important impact on the state are these judicial races.
Right.
And I know that the Locke Foundation will be laser focused on that, as will Carolina Journal.
That's right. Absolutely. It'll be an interesting year, and we'll see how it plays out, but I imagine there will be a lot of waves to this year.
Yeah.
Up and down and up and down.
So make sure you go to johnlocke.org, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook. It's a whole new look, as Donald mentioned, and then we'll be sort of unveiling a new look for the Carolina Journal. That will be coming up shortly as well. So go to carolinajournal.com and make sure you keep tuned in to both entities, John Locke on the academic side and Carolina Journal on the news side. Carolina Journal is the preeminent right of center. When I say right of center, I mean free market. I would love to be able to say that's bipartisan, but it doesn't seem to be at this point. But we are we come at the news from a freedom perspective. So be sure to check in with Carolina Journal each and every day and johnlocke.org. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we're hoping for a healthy and prosperous 2022 for us and for you as well.